Hello and welcome to today's webinar, FinMar Content Essentials, Content Delivery Strategy. I've got Logan Burgess on the line with us again for this webinar. And today what we're really going to talk about is strategies on how to deliver our content to investors, clients, prospects. But we're going to take a little bit different look at it than what I think many people were expecting on this call. Is we want to talk about some of the big picture philosophies around getting to the number before the number. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute, but as we do that, I just wanted to kind of, take a look at, something that Logan pulled up, which I absolutely love this quote. I've never actually seen this quote before, but last call we talked about content is king and we used that Bill Gates quote, and this is so true that it's so fitting for this discussion. And I know that, Logan, you wanted to kind of use this to introduce yourself and kind of where we're going with today's conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. And thank you again for having me here today. As you said, I just love this quote because, everybody in the marketing world, for the most part, has heard that famous quote by Bill Gates, which we talked about a little bit on the last webinar, content is king. But I really like this quote by Jonathan Perlman over at BuzzFeed. He says, content is king, distribution is queen, and she wears the pants. I love the quote, especially coming from BuzzFeed because, for everybody on this call who's familiar with BuzzFeed, they're a web content service specifically marketing news stories and listicles to a younger demographic. But they've been prolifically successful at getting their content out there and monetizing that content, most importantly. And as you can see in Jonathan's mind, it's one thing to have great content, but it's a whole nother animal to have great distribution to back it up. And that's really something that we wanted to focus on today's call.
Well, and the thing that I really like about it is when we look at that idea of distribution is queen and distribution wears the pants, so to speak, in the family is before we can really even get to any meaningful content development. And the truth is, we talk all the time about how content is such a barrier to growth and growing a firm's marketing. But I think one of the other pieces of that barrier is you can't really get to writing a piece of content without a clear understanding of how you're going to distribute it, who you're going to distribute it to. And we don't want to take deep dives into every distribution channel, but just to touch on some, we have email, we have our websites, we've got Facebook, LinkedIn, social media, platforms like Twitter and Google+, plus we've also got traditional offline distribution channels, newsletters, all these things. But it's so important to kind of have a clear understanding of the person who we're going to try to reach and which channels would be appropriate.
Absolutely, Craig. Yeah, if we think back a little bit on the BuzzFeed example, BuzzFeed has it a little bit easier, I would argue, than the average, RIA or independent broker dealer. In that BuzzFeed is primarily targeting this demographic that's 16 to 30 years old. So they can be very specific with the type of content they're creating and the channels that they're choosing to leverage. But I think in the context of financial services marketing, it can be really useful to look at this dot plot here, which you developed and is in the RIA Guide to Smart Communications. But it really does a good job illustrating that in financial services, we're not only trying to engage that 25-year-old who's just getting started, but we're still trying to have a conversation with the 75 or the 80-year-old who's going to be interested in legacy planning or estate planning. So, honestly, I would argue that BuzzFeed has it a little bit easy because they have such a small demographic that they're going after. But toward the end of this call, we're going to introduce some platforms which can help firms really get efficient with that distribution when it comes to getting their content in front of the 25-year-old and the 75-year-old.
You actually just made me think of something that I wasn't really anticipating talking about on this discussion, but the importance of having an understanding of the exact audience, so male, female, age demographics, things like that, especially when we get into a digital world, because I did some research about 6 months ago, which I'm happy to share with everybody, but it talks about which platforms have the highest engagement for different audiences. So Instagram, for example, which is very much a picture-based platform, very high among women and teens. Not so much among middle-aged males, not to say they're not there, but that kind of gets you into understanding who you're trying to reach. So when you look at these investor profiles that we've been working in, not only is it the type of content and the types of services, but it's also the channels in which we would ultimately try to reach them in. And that kind of leads us to what I think one of the big underlying problems that nobody talks about, and dare we say it, but is our focus on AUM growth ruining firms' marketing? And I'd love your thoughts on that, because I started talking a lot about it, and even in our own marketing, and as we've started to kind of look at a little bit more granular approach, the number before the number, there's so much focus on assets. Even in our own business, we're talking about new clients. We want to do what every other business. We want to grow. We want to attract new clients, and we want to drive revenue. Well, that's the result. But what about everything that has to come before that? And focusing on those key metrics on a week-by-week basis that ultimately lead up to AUM or new assets.
Yeah, Craig, I know that you and I have both been on calls, with RIAs, with broker-dealers where, we're talking about launching a new campaign, we're talking about doing some new initiatives, and it seems like many times the focus is on that final number, as you just mentioned. Most commonly, in financial services is that new AUM acquired target. But, I'd encourage everybody that's on this call to kind of take a step back and as you said, think about the numbers that are behind that number. What are the key numbers which actually drive the success of bringing on new assets? It could be website traffic, email outreach, directory listings, and organic search. There's a huge number of things that can really contribute to the success or failure of a campaign. And from my own experience within financial services, if you're working within a large marketing department or even a small marketing department, it can be really useful to have somebody on your team which is solely responsible for achieving these key numbers before the big number, whether that be leads generated on a weekly basis, whether it's downloads of white papers, whatever that is. I would encourage firms or individuals that are on this call to build accountability within your teams that can help make those numbers possible, which then in turn makes that AUM target much more achievable.
Accountability, that's something that I know that our firm, and it's something that I hold dear, and it's something that's so often missed in marketing, is holding us accountable. And and I guess we're all guilty of it, especially in marketing, which is why there's, I think sometimes a genuine distrust for marketers in the financial marketing spaces, is trying to weave the data into a story that doesn't really ultimately end up in delivering assets. But the thing that I love about what we've been working on, and as we get more granular and we start working with firms, and even in our own business, to focus on those numbers before the number. How do we convert a portion of our website traffic each month to a new relationship? That's not a lead, but just a new relationship. Can we find out a person's information? Can we get their email address? Can we use a tool like Vesterly to kind of identify that site visitor? If we can just move a small percentage, 2, 3, 4, 5% of anonymous website traffic to known website traffic, then we start to march up the ladder here and start to identify those relationships, qualify them, hopefully move them into prospect meetings. And then if we do enough of those, we will see new assets, new clients signed and brought into the firm, which is the goal. And
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Craig.
Please go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna help introduce here this quote, and this is another great quote for marketers who are out there. And I'm going to let you really hit on this quote in particular, but from my own experience, this idea of experimentation when it comes to finding not only what are the numbers which are going to drive your AUM targets, but what are the platforms as well which can help make those numbers possible. I think that, in my own experience, a lot of firms out there, especially a lot of larger firms who may be more comfortable in kind of what they've been doing for the last 5 or 10 years, let's call it, there's a lot of hesitation, I would say, to explore new platforms and to have that kind of experimental mindset, which I think is so important and is such an integral part of the successful teams that I've seen out there within the financial space.
And I think one of the other important pieces of this quote and this idea, and really it's a mindset, is that the successful firms are understanding the idea of experimentation. But it takes me back to what you just said, Logan, where the idea that there's accountability. We need to get past this idea that every outcome needs to be good. Some things are losers. Some things just don't work. It's not to say they don't work, but for certain firms, they may not work, where for other firms, they might work. And only if we take a step back and we look at the kind of our data studio approach and the numbers before the numbers, from website traffic to new relationships to qualifying that relationship to prospect meetings, and I'll assign them or align them to the different activities that we're investing in. Only then are we going to be able to know what are the winners and what are the losers, and making sure we give it enough time. But firms that are out there, I mean, Edwards Jones is one of the arguably the larger firms in the marketplace that, yes, they're spending big money and they have budgets that $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion in assets, firms with assets under management might not have, but they got there over time by doing a lot of things right, having experimentation as the kind of the underlying principle, building on the things that work, and then eliminating the things that don't. And I think that that's part of what we're really kind of trying to capture and get everybody thinking about in relationship to this distribution discussion, is how do we distribute content, but we have to do it with a mindset and a spirit of experimentation and measurement and accountability.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. And this is a great chart which I think you sent to me a week or two ago, but it really does a nice job to kind of tie together this entire mindset of, at the end of the day, when we're distributing this content, we do need to keep our eyes on the prize in a sense as to what are kind of the core phases between a client first being introduced to the firm and a client moving assets to a firm that need to occur. And would you be able to kind of break this chart down a little bit and talk a little bit about how distribution fits into this chart in your mind?
Yeah, so when we look at the way that we're approaching financial marketing in general, is we look at it in 3 major categories. The getting found, ways in which your firm gets found. In the digital space, Google search, one of the popular ways a firm can get found. Social media, email, and email introduction is certainly one. And then in the offline world, client referrals, a way our firm gets found. And then once they come in, that we have to engage and capture those people in order to kind of move that relationship forward. So at that initial point, a seed is planted using the metaphor of growth. And then if we are able to capture a relationship and engage them in the right ways, we then have the opportunity to continue to deliver information, which is really getting into distribution channels. Somebody comes into our website and we have an integration that features some relevant articles that we're curating on Vestorly. They click one of the financial planning articles, put in their email address. Now we can start to nurture that relationship by sending them emails, another distribution channel. We can run ads that are kind of circling around as they go about their day on the web, another distribution channel. We get to a certain point, we can pick up the phone and call. I mean, the truth is that's a distribution channel. The ability to communicate messages can happen via one-to-one interaction. but that it's a continual cycle. And even when somebody becomes a client, we still have to continually engage them through a variety of distribution and aligned content to just continually build and nurture and harvest that relationship. Just to make sure we're servicing them right, but then also to see if there's opportunities to increase wallet share and some of these other ways that we can grow assets that's not all about new business.
Yeah, absolutely, Craig. And I think to kind of wrap things up here, one thing that we talked about, as we were kind of, offline before this call was we really wanted to keep this focused on kind of the theories that financial marketers should have in mind when it comes to being more effective at getting their brand message out there. We quickly wanted to break down, though, this concept of the technology adoption life cycle. And what this basically shows right here is it shows the different stages of consumers, or in this case, it could be an RIA who's adopting these different types of platforms. On the furthest right side here, we have the laggards, which are the technologies that have been on the market for the longest period of time. We have the late majority, the early majority, and then on the left here, we have the early adopters and the innovators. And I think, to kind of wrap up the call, I think it would be really useful to talk about what are some of these innovative platforms that firms are using right now that can really move the needle when it comes to those numbers that are before the big AUM target number that a lot of firms have in mind.
Yeah, and we wanted to share a little bit about some of the investment management tools that are out there, or client relation, client service, investment management tools, because that's what we find a lot of firms are comfortable with. We're going to move into, and we're going to wrap this call up with a discussion around the marketing tools and the financial marketing tools that are out there. But over the years, we've had just a wide range of technologies that have come on the market. And today, some of them have been there for a long time. But when they were first introduced, firms didn't necessarily know how that was going to play out in the financial services space in general. Was it going to impact independent wealth management, and how that was ultimately going to shape the future of RIAs, but also the financial services space. That, I think, for most firms, has kind of settled down, and there's a clear picture of how these technologies play into the future growth of their firm. But I think the opportunity to really explore some of these new marketing technologies and where they might fit into the growth is where we're going to see opportunities for firms to really grow their marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And sticking here with this technology adoption life cycle kind of model, on the right side, we see Google Analytics, Salesforce, email automation platforms like MailChimp, which have been being used for a very long time. And then more recently, here within the world of financial marketing, we have CRM platforms like Juncture, we have compliance systems like Smarsh, Broadridge, which we've talked about a lot here on the podcast, Craig, a system that basically aggregates and creates financial content. And then on the left side as well, we have these early adopter and these innovator platforms that are changing the way that a lot of financial firms are marketing right now. We've hit on Bestorly a lot here. SharpSpring is something that we use in-house, but HubSpot, Hootsuite, and Google AdWords are three things that, when it comes to that quote from Edward Jones, these are the types of platforms, I guess, in my mind, for a firm that's looking to be more experimental and to try some things that they haven't necessarily done in the past. These are a great starting point. Get a basic Google AdWords account and start playing around with some pay-per-click campaigns. Hootsuite is a great system that I've used a little bit in the past, basically a social media marketing automation platform. So these are all different ways, I guess. These are some of the low-hanging fruit, I guess, to say it most correctly when it comes to being experimental with your marketing and trying things that could move the needle, and most likely competitors within your space are doing right now.
Yeah, and kind of wrapping up the call, I would argue that in this kind of technology adoption life cycle, or Moore's law, that even the firms who are really making investments in financial marketing and making investments in some of these early systems, because they know the importance of investing today to learn and refine and mature for growth over the coming year and coming years. I would argue that when you look at the entire segment of independent wealth advisors, whether that's in the RIA or independent broker-dealer space, that the firms who are really focused on this, they're really in that early market. So for those firms that are looking to make these investments, jump in, pick some systems, really start to identify how they align with some specific business objectives for the year. The thing that we can't stress enough is don't pick a system or pick a strategy or pick an approach, do it for 30 days and then abandon it. I've written about this a lot. I talk about this a lot. If that's your approach, don't even get started. That would be my best advice. It takes time for these things to take hold in your firm, and some of it's a culture shift. Even for small firms, you're changing the culture and the way you leverage technology and the way you connect and distribute content to both clients and prospects and your community and centers of influence. So don't be afraid to look at starting with 1, 2, 3 systems and strategies, and how your distribution and content creation strategy, plays out over 6 months or 12 months. Because if you're only looking at 30 to 60 days, you're likely going to make an investment and be very disappointed in that investment. So that's our big story for today. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to answer any questions you might have and to dive deeper into anything we've talked about on today's call. Feel free to reach out to Logan or I, and please join us on our next webinar. And you can visit us at finmartoday.com for recordings of past webinars, or visit our website at marketingwiz.co. Thank you and have a great day.